Okay, I guess we can have you kick things off then, John.
Great, thank you. Thank you, committee, for having me today. My name is John Sales. I'm the CEO of the Vermont Food Bank, and I live right here in Montpelier. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Yes, pleasure to be here.
So we're here to hear a little bit more about Vermont for Feeding Vermonters in the context of the budget adjustment.
Thank you. So my understanding is, well, here's what I know, that the food bank last year, as we talked about in a hearing a few days ago, was appropriated $500,000 for a new grant program out of the Agency of Agriculture, Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. That was a program that the Vermont Food Bank had been operating independently, and is now in state statute and was funded with one-time money at $500,000. Between July 1st and August 6th, the food bank was able to spend that $500,000, and has also used some of our philanthropic dollars, which we will consistently to continue the program. I think in 2023, we spent about $1.8 million in the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program. This year, it's about $1.2 million, including that $500,000. We have the capacity to do much more. And one of the reasons that we're here, we do have an operational plan to be able, as the food bank, to spend an additional $1.5 million in grant money through VFV through the end of this fiscal year. So we're confident that we'd be able to get that money out by June 30th to farmers across the state. One of the challenges, and we do have a few farmers in committee, is the state, when you're contracting with farmers, forward contracting to purchase crops, the state fiscal year isn't a good match, because farmers are planning their next year plantings, January, February, and this is the time of year when we're talking to farmers and writing contracts. And so having a larger amount and will give us, if we can get on a permanent cycle of being base budget, give us the ability to have the confidence to enter into those contracts during this time of year, to be able to fulfill them throughout the summer and the harvest season. So this year, we would request respectfully that the committee include in any communication to the House Appropriations Committee a request for the additional $1.5 million. The original request by this committee in your budget memo last year was $2 million for Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. We're very grateful to have gotten the $500,000 and have been able to deploy that, and we'd like to do more. I just listened to the governor's budget address and obviously have been talking to members of the Appropriations Committee, the House Appropriations Committee, and the message is clearly that there's a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, and there's going to be a lot of competition for scarce dollars. I think to the extent that there are challenges coming up in Vermont, I would just, I guess, kind of obviously make the case that making sure that people are fed and that our Vermont farmers and growers are, have some steady income and some support from the state should be a very high priority. Just quickly, as we've gone through this before, the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program really has three main components. One is large-scale direct purchasing, which I was mentioning. There were 17 farms that we purchased from with that $500,000, mostly larger farms, because that kind of made sense to spend that smaller amount of money in larger contracts and to be able to track that. We also do grants to our food shelf and meal site partners. so that they can contract directly with smaller farms in their regions. For instance, the food shelf may buy half a dozen CSA shares from a local farm. It wouldn't make sense for the food bank to roll a truck or have that farm deliver that amount of food and then redistribute it. And so it makes a lot more sense. It's more cost efficient to have those direct relationships. And that lets us distribute the money more equitably throughout the state, because there are parts of the state where we don't have those large farms that we can partner with. I think about the Rutland area, where we work with a lot of smaller farms through the grant program. And then finally, the culturally responsive foods, making sure that our Afghan population and some of our folks from the African areas, mostly in the Burlington area, that we do contracts with local farms that grow the kinds of crops that those communities prefer. And so making sure that kind of everybody's getting what they want and need through our programs. Again, want to make sure we're equitably serving the whole state. The full $2 million budget will support 200 to 300 farms throughout Vermont. And I know that I don't know what's in the governor's budget. I'm sure the budget's released now, but people haven't had a chance to look at it. It's possible. We've had conversations with the administration about there being money in the budget for Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. So I'd be pleasantly surprised, but not shocked if we do get some money in there. But I'd love to set the bar high and have a greater impact throughout the state for this budget year. Be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Nelson.
What is your total budget?
So the operating budget for the food bank is about $20 million. Our full budget, including the value of donated food, is about $35 million.
So 35 million.
Yeah.
And I was state chairman, Ducks Unlimited. Previous life. And we always said we'd put 85% of our money into the mud. And I did a little Google check. You seem to run very efficient.
We do, and food banks do in general. We are not just, if we were just purchasing food and distributing it, our financials will look different, but we're leveraging a lot of donated food, both, food from Vermont farms. A lot of the farms that we purchase from also donate to the food bank. And then, distributors and manufacturers around Vermont, and then nationally. And that doesn't include the 2 federal programs we run. So it really is that being able to leverage donated food.
So are you running it? Does it cost the organization about 15% of your 35 million to operate? Or that's what I deducted when I looked at it.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
That's a worthy cause.
Thank you.
And so I brought this forward so we could talk about it. And so people understood that this isn't going to pay people's.
And I will add that we did grow tremendously during COVID, like a lot of nonprofits did. And in the last 6 months, we did a restructuring and went actually from we were at about 85 FTEs down to 75, and eliminated a couple of programs because we could see that with all that, all the money that was flowing through both philanthropic dollars and federal dollars to the state, that the food bank was able to utilize to make some progress, that it just wasn't sustainable in the long term. So we've kind of refocused on our core work and tried to realign to I don't like to live within our means because means is a variable concept. But to make sure that we're able to continue adding the value we need to in the community.
Representative O'Brien and then Representative Bunting.
Thank you, Chair. John, could you expand on just sort of how your menu works? Because, we've been to your warehouses and with this Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, do you look at, what you have on hand and you say, we're coming, in the next year and you're like, we could really use protein or we could really use apples, how does that work because you're getting a certain amount from federal programs, you're getting a certain amount from donations, the Hannafords of the world, right? And so how do you just sit down and you say, well, Bert's Orchard's got apples, they're a willing partner with us, we get a good price, everybody's happy. How does that all work?
Yeah, so we forecast, we use a lot of the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters produce. It's split about 50-50. About half of it goes to our Veggie Van Gogh produce distributions, which happen all over the state. And about half of it goes to food shelves through distribution. So just from historical knowledge from past years, we have an idea of how much we can move. And so we know generally how much we're going to be able to move through Veggie Van Goghs in a year. And also what can our partners handle? Because there's a lot of variation in capabilities. Literally some food shelves are, a little room in the church basement. And then some of them are like the Upper Valley Haven or Feeding Champlain Valley, where they have warehouses and freezers and coolers and trucks. And so at this time of year, we're actually looking at our budget for Vermonters Feeding Vermonters and saying, okay, here's what we have. Here's what we know we need. We want to spread it around because we want to have a variety of vegetables and fruits. And we've been doing a lot less protein. We really ramped up our protein purchases during COVID because we had the resources. And the folks that are producing protein, the beef and poultry and to some extent dairy and eggs also needed that support, right? And so we ended up buying a lot of protein. We've really scaled that back because it is so much more expensive. And we want to make sure we're getting the most value for the dollars. The one thing that we've really consistently purchased was eggs. It's more stable, shelf stable, and people love eggs. And we've got a great Vermont producer in Maple Meadow Farms where we buy most of our eggs. So it really is a kind of a forecast based on demand and available budget. For instance, if we had $2 million in base budget this time of year, we would be planning for being able to spend that money within this fiscal year.
Representative Tussle.
Okay, I have two questions. So the first one is, I know you try and be as efficient as possible and you get some donations and you make some purchases. I was just wondering, I recall in the past hearing about some very intensive gleaning operations in my part of the county. But I don't know in Windham County, but I don't know organizationally, is that part of your process that you contact farmers and are able to glean things that they aren't going to utilize, squash that are the wrong size and, that kind of thing in terms of trying to increase the volume of produce that you have to distribute?
So great question. For many years, the food bank did have a gleaning program.
Yep.
And the food bank itself was actively coordinating gleaning in Windham County area.
Yeah.
Harlow Farm,
Yeah.
Ridge One.
Yeah, that's where I live.
Right. And then in Chittenden County.
Mhm.
So that was one of the areas of work that we decided to stop doing when we did our restructuring. But we did that very thoughtfully because we were able to hand over all that work to other nonprofits that were already doing that. So for instance, in Windham County, all the gleaning operations are now being run by Willing Hands,
Okay.
which is kind of an upper valley, but they've been growing and spreading out, and they have the capacity and the skill set to do that. In Chittenden County, we've handed it over actually to Feeding Chittenden, to Feeding Champlain Valley, and the Intervale has always been a partner. And then in other parts of the state, there were already other groups that were doing that we're taking care of the cleaning.
But none of that food comes to you, then that gets to people through other channels.
That goes to our same partners that we
Yeah.
work with,
Yeah.
but directly from those other nonprofits.
Got it. Okay,
So the food isn't being left in the field, it's
Right.
still getting captured. We're just not touching it.
got it. The other question I have is, actually springs from a conversation we had here last week. There were some questions in our, among our committee, just in terms of, the idea with Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, as we understand it, is that there's no kind of assessment or requirement that you need to fill out. If you go, you can access the food from the food shelves. Could you just speak a little bit about that? Because there was some concern that people might, like, how could you prohibit people from taking advantage of that if they didn't have a need? And then utilizing these resources that are supposed to be for people who have a
Right.
need.
Right. So unsurprisingly, it's a question I get a lot.
Mhm.
And the way in a kind of a big picture, the way we look at it at the food bank is even if it were, it's kind of the 80-20 rule,
Mhm.
right? Although I think it's with food security, I think it's more like the 95-5 rule. If folks have been to a food shelf or a food distribution, it's frankly not the kind of thing that people go to if they don't need it or have the feeling that they need it. And sometimes I think there's there can be gray areas, right? So I've talked to folks who had relatives that went to Veggie Van Goghs and those are really, they're drive-through events. There are no questions asked. Some of our food shelf partners do have, they don't have requirements for income, but sometimes you have to show proof that you live in these certain towns.
Yeah.
That they only serve those towns. So there are folks who I think maybe feel they need it, and somebody else could look at their situation and say, I don't understand why you feel you need this.
Mhm.
But from my perspective, that's such a low percentage of what we do that it's kind of that's okay. And the trade-off is that more people who really do need it will show up because there's such low barriers. I think a good example is Universal School Meals, where I'm pointing to Honor Horton and Hunger Free Vermont, who really were instrumental in having universal school meals in Vermont. And we knew and know that there were a lot of kids who were eligible, but because of stigma, weren't utilizing those school meals. And when you make them universal, the governor has made the argument, I don't think that taxpayers should be paying for meals for kids whose parents can afford it. But we do that to make sure that we're getting all of the kids that really do need it. And I think I'll make the argument, and Nora can scowl at me if I'm wrong, but I think even a lot of those kids whose families maybe could afford that, maybe are eating better food, getting fed at school, where you have nutritionists and the cooks preparing delicious, fresh local food. A lot of that is from our farms too.
Nelson?
What I like about what you do and this organization does is you're bringing real food to people. And it's not processed and it's not hydrogenated seed oils and potato chips and candy bars, soda pop. It's real foods. And that's the value. And then a lot of these dollars are recirculated back through our farming economy. And so that has great value. And yeah, 95-10, 90-10. It's like that with everything, John. It's like that with everything. 10% of the people or 5% of the people, as you're thinking, just can't do it right. It's just, and maybe, perhaps, and maybe the instance you're talking about, maybe I know about, because maybe I've heard about it, is maybe they, are elderly, and maybe You know, they've come from a time when they did run out of food growing up. And they see an opportunity to get food, good food.
So I will, with the Vermonters feeding Vermonters, it is all fresh, local, very high quality food. You know, the food bank does get a lot of donations from the grocery industry, and we get what's called salvage. So we do get a little bit of that processed food, but it's actually not a huge percentage of the amount of food we distribute. And we don't do soda. We don't source it at all anymore. In fact, we used to have it in our warehouses because the Pepsi bottler would, when they had extra stuff going close to code, they would bring it to us, and they stopped bringing it to us. So we don't really have that anymore at all. Yeah. I mean, I watched this, a program last night about the MAHA movement and the changes in the food pyramid. And there were some nutrition experts and folks that work in SNAP. And, you know, I agree with them that I love the new focus on whole foods, fresh foods, and making sure that those are available to more people. You know, there can be challenges, right? You have to be able to cook. Not with an apple. Luckily, an apple you can just eat, right? But a lot of fresher foods, you need to be able to have the facilities to cook and you know, have the right foods that your kids are going to eat. Making that more available, make that easier to have.
Just lost our screen. Oh,
There we go. Okay.
They're not white lighted though.
Here. There we go.
Yeah, okay.
This one's blinking.
Let's break down here.
Okay, let's see.
People were complaining in the cafeteria about the Wi-Fi earlier.
Nah.
I think a lot of people in the building.
Yeah, says we're good. We're live and we got a white light.
Right.
Let's keep going then. Representative Burt.
Thanks, John. So I'm one of the farms that gets to participate in the Vermonters Feeding Vermont, and we're definitely grateful for it. And we've also had, this year, we were able to donate quite a bit through Gleaning Central Vermont Harvest.
Yes, yep.
Allison.
Yep, Allison
Yep.
does
They
a
did
great job.
They
Yeah.
came and got thousands of pounds of apples with
Yeah.
a whole crew of volunteers. And I think I was talking with Michelle and others the other day about that, the wanting to make sure, obviously, that Vermont tax dollars are being utilized as best they can. And, you know, I know you run a great program that is trying to do the best you can with our tax dollars. And I think that part of where I was coming from in this discussion was not so much a concern about who might be coming to get the food in terms of within our state, but it's the more I'm here and learning the different hoops that we jump through the state. If a state like New Hampshire decides they're not gonna fund, you know, their food bank like Vermont does, and Vermont becomes, if I were in New Hampshire and that's the case, I might start to look at Vermont, say there are more opportunities for me to be there and live affordably and live within my means. So that's where, that's not in your purview. It's a, you know, it's a challenge. I think that, you know, it'd be nice if all the states came together and said, this is how we're gonna take care of people. So that we're not fighting each other, right? And somebody's gonna take advantage that's actually more generous. You know, that's a tragedy. So that was part of a discussion I was having.
Well, if I
It
could,
does concern me, and maybe you have some information on it. Maybe you can reassure taxpayers that like we're not being taken advantage of. That's kind of what I'm looking for, you know, it's.
yeah, actually, we do have some knowledge about that. So we work very closely with the New Hampshire Food Bank. And as we do with food banks across the network, but, you know, Western Mass, which is based in Springfield and serves that part of the state that's on the border, the New Hampshire Food Bank, and to some extent in New York, but very small in Latham, the regional food bank. And in Maine too, where they've got a great food bank. And so Northern New England really works together very closely. We know that there's some, some border crossover. We actually help serve the Keene food shelf because it's more convenient from our Brattleboro location than from the New Hampshire Food Bank's warehouse in Manchester. We don't send Vermonters Feeding Vermonters over there. We distribute that. But we know that there are, particularly for like the Upper Valley Haven and at some locations, some of our food shelves in Brattleboro are in the Brattleboro area. Frankly, Bellows Falls is right over the bridge. There is some cross-border stuff. We actually have a federal agreement for the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And there's restrictions on if food comes to Vermont, only Vermont citizens are supposed to be accessing that. So we have agreements with the Western Mass Food Bank and the New Hampshire Food Bank to allow both sides. And that's really the point, is it happens both ways. So we have Vermonters going over to the food shelves in New Hampshire also, and to some extent down in Massachusetts. So I think to the extent it happens, I don't think it's a large amount. And I think it's kind of a wash with people going both ways.
Appreciate that.
Representative Nelson.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Do you see anything from the commodity credit group, the federal group, like milk, where we went up 4% in production last year and milk prices crashing, and I heard they're starting to buy butter and cheese. Does that come back through you folks?
Yeah, absolutely. The TFAP program that I just mentioned actually started with the Great Cheese Giveaway many, many years ago. And more.
Give away more.
Yeah. So when USDA goes out and purchases bulk commodities to stabilize prices, food banks are, and the TFAP program is the outlet for that product. So there is a, I think it's 250,000 is the TFAP authorized spend in the budget. I'm looking at Carrie Staler.
And for Vermont,
No, for nationally,
nationally.
250 million.
It's 250
million. And so the USDA goes out and purchases food and then distributes it mostly through food banks. And then there's the CCC, Commodity Credit Corporation funds, which the Secretary of Ag uses to make those purchases to balance ag markets. And most of that food that's purchased does get processed and then distributed through the TFAP program. So, and we take advantage of that as much as possible. We call that bonus TFAP.
Oh, well, more.
Yeah.
Representative Lipsky.
Apologize, but TFAP,
The Emergency Food Assistance Program.
I got the last three, but I didn't know what the T was. Thank you.
That's a federal program that's been in place for some time.
For decades, yes.
Yeah, and it's been more or less stable. Has that been affected by any?
No, it fluctuates a lot based on what's happening in Washington. Through our national organization, Feeding America, we're really the only advocates for the TFAP program. And this year, we've actually been trying to raise that congressional appropriation to $400 million nationally to give the USDA more purchasing power to bring that in. I think particularly now with US farmers getting squeezed with exports. In the last Trump administration, they did a huge farm support program, and there was a huge surge in TFAP food. And then that kind of faded away. This time it looks like they're focusing more on cash payments to farmers. And so we don't really know what that's going to mean, but there's a lot of variation in how TFAP comes in.
Just to follow up, does it break down by per capita? Like, or can we leverage somehow and get
Yeah, so
more TFAP than other states?
no, there's a formula, and it's based on poverty levels and unemployment. So it's a federal formula. So we get our allocation of TFAP, and then we actually allocate that out to, there's 80 to 85 of our food shelf partners. because in order to distribute TFAP, you have to agree to keep a bunch of records because people have to self-certify that they qualify for TFAP foods. And a lot of our partners don't want to do that. But the bonus that I was talking about, the CCC purchases, those are offered, and we can take our allocation, and then if others don't take theirs, we can take extra. So we keep a really close eye on that. Sometimes it depends on how much room we have in our distribution centers. But if you get 5 truckloads of walnut pieces, which has happened, sometimes it gets challenging to move it fast enough to be able to fill that up with something different.
You said you got alligator once, right?
That was the most interesting.
A truckload of alligator.
Fresh, frozen?
Frozen, half a truckload of frozen alligator was offered. I don't think we took it. People in the north are not big alligator eaters.
Should have sold it and you could have put more money in it.
Not legal representative.
If you ever get a truckload of lobster, let you and I know, and we'll help you
ask Gordon.
convert that into vegetables and other foods.
That's me.
Representative O'Brien.
Has there ever been talk in, say, even New England of states sort of doing mini, barter TFAP type things where, we do a lot of milk, for example, and we could trade with a state like Maine that has more potatoes.
So there are states that have purchase programs. In fact, Massachusetts has MEFAP, the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program. And that's basically a legislative allocation that goes out to the food banks, and they have to purchase Massachusetts produced food. We talk a lot about kind of balancing. Maine had a project for a while, which is actually closing down because it wasn't economically viable to grow and then process and freeze broccoli. And we were purchasing their broccoli at a really good price, frozen broccoli. But again, as I said, they ran the program for about 4 years and they didn't see any path to breaking even. And so they're closing it down. But it's interesting, with things like milk, it's really challenging because of the federal milk policies. So we can't really just shift milk over. But we do a lot of trading. So for instance, for national donations, we actually have we call it a cluster in the Northeast. So all the food banks in New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and we consolidate. So if there's a couple truckloads of something and one food bank can't use it all, we'll divide it up between us. And we do share things in between each other.
We were talking earlier, I think maybe it was a question that Representative O'Brien had asked about eggs, and planning, forecasting and working, ahead with growers and producers. And I'm wondering, would you be ever in an instance where you're talking with Maple Meadow, for example, and saying, we would like to, for next year, plan on purchasing this many eggs. Are they going to go out and invest in more production in order to meet what the food bank is asking for? Or is the food bank's part so small compared with their total volume that it's not really going to have that kind of impact?
I don't know for Maple Meadow. I do know that there have been other farmers, sometimes the smaller ones, that because of I'm thinking of Laughing Child Farm, I think is one.
Bob's here from Chappelle Potato.
Bob's here. Well, he could talk about it directly. But I have heard about that happening, and I know it has happened. And like when we're contracting with Maple Meadow, we're letting them know the amount of money we have to spend over the next period of time. And so I'm sure they're always trying to balance their production versus their demand.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Okay, yes.
You just roll up. Hi, Carrie Saylor from Food Bank.
there have been instances, particularly with Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, where we worked with a farm that was a smaller scale, and in order to meet the capacity that we were hoping to get from them, the money we've given them has gone to purchase equipment. There was a carrot farm where people ended up getting a cleaner and a bagger so that they could scale up and more efficiently meet that need. So it's not that folks are necessarily going to count on the food bank and the funding that we have available to generate scale, but they will use that in a business sense to often generate efficiencies so that the scale they're working at is a better, price model for them. I think that's maybe a better way to parse that.
Okay. Good. I know that we had also invited Honor Horton from Hunger Free Vermont to speak to this subject if she wanted to. Before we let John go, were there any other questions, anything you wanted to say in conclusion?
Just thank you. I really do appreciate all the support and the time that this committee takes to understand kind of the food bank's impact on local ag.
John, finally, you were talking about egg supply, and in the last year, we dealt with a lot of the crisis of avian flu and impact on poultry and eggs. So is there any update? Is that stabilized or?
Things are getting better. Egg prices are coming down. And when that happens, what we do is just buy more. Because we have a budget, we budget for items like that. And when more is available, eggs are very much in demand. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Hello, Honor.
Oh. Thanks for having me in. Nora Horton. I'm the Executive Director of Hunger Free Vermont. And I'll just start by saying that Hunger Free Vermont strongly supports the appropriation in the Budget Adjustment Act of the full $2 million that the Vermont Food Bank is requesting to fund Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. And, our vision is ultimately that we have a system that makes it possible for everybody in our state to meet all of their basic needs at the same time, to actually end hunger and to dramatically reduce the dependence that we have on the charitable food network to not just operate as an emergency food support system for people, but as it's operating now, an everyday way of helping people respond to hunger. But we're not in that situation right now. The situation that we're in is that hunger has been increasing in Vermont and around the country every year for the past 3 years. And under the current policy approach being taken by the federal administration, I don't see that really appalling trend changing anytime soon. And where hunger is increasing significantly is in, all different kinds of households are facing an increase in the challenge of creating food security for themselves. But one of the really striking places where that's increasing the fastest is among households that are over the income limits for Three Squares Vermont, the SNAP program nationally. So over 185% of the federal poverty level. And that's because, as Representative Lipsky just was talking about, the dramatic increase in the cost of food and many other basic necessities is driving food security, driving hunger and being at risk of hunger higher up the income levels in our state and in our country. And so, we were just, you all were having a conversation with John Sales just a minute ago about this question about how we structure these programs to best use taxpayer dollars. And the thing is that we need a way for people who don't fit the very restrictive means testing of some of these federal programs to still be able to address the fact that they are facing hunger on a monthly basis. And that's one really critical function that the charitable food system provides in our state. It's also really important to understand that the way that we've structured our charitable food system, our Universal School Meals Program is another great example, to eliminate administrative barriers is not only making it possible for more people who really need to access these programs to do so without stigma and shame, but also the cost of implementing and maintaining those barriers is very high. So we could be spending our taxpayer dollars to make sure that food is getting to people, or we could be spending them on paperwork. And happily, we're choosing more and more in this state to not go the paperwork and barriers route that I think is really a very inefficient use of a lot of our funding. Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, on the other hand, is a highly efficient use of our funding, and it creates a dramatic economic multiplier effect in our state, which also, other programs that Hunger Free Vermont supports and that this committee supports, like the Farm to School efforts and the additional payments for schools to be able to purchase local food in an incentive program. Those all create significant economic multiplier effects in our state, where they're supporting farmers, they're supporting economic development and growth, while they're also ensuring that fewer people in our state are going hungry. So, we're in a really challenging time right now because federal policy decisions are making it harder for people to meet all of their basic needs, and they're increasing hunger in our state. And so programs like Vermonters Feeding Vermonters are essential right now to really keep people healthy and being able to contribute to their communities here in Vermont, while some of the federal systems are failing more of us right now. So, and I'm happy to answer other questions that you might have about kind of hunger statistics that we have access to, or anything else you would want to know.
That's a helpful context. And we had, I think it was Representative Lipsky last week when we were having a conversation that may have been this conversation, asked if we could have an update at some point on this, I think just clarifying what's happening federally. We went through the associated with the shutdown, but it wasn't really because of the shutdown, but the status of the SNAP funding. And that was because of the shutdown at the time. But prior to that, there was a legislation passed. I don't know that anything has changed from Washington, but that was a question I think that Jed had. And I don't know if maybe there's another time if there's more to say about that, or if you'd like to say anything now.
I mean, I can speak to that briefly if you'd like. In July, HR 1 was passed at the federal level, and that bill is actually what is making what are being called kind of cuts to SNAP, to Medicaid, and to a number of other programs that affect a lot of us in Vermont. A lot of what we are for kind of shorthand calling cuts in these programs are not cuts in the sense that they're just saying, well, these groups of people are no longer eligible in the same way for the most part. Rather, what they're doing is they're imposing a lot of additional paperwork requirements, more quicker turnarounds for having to recertify and reprove that you're eligible for the programs, a lot of those burdens. And they're cutting funding to states to administer those programs at the same time that they're requiring states to do a lot more work, and individuals to fill out a lot more additional paperwork and verifications on top of all the income verifications that were already required and working quite well, to ensure that people were qualified and eligible for the programs. So that's the situation that that every state in the country, including Vermont, is in right now. Part of, we're calling on, you all this session and the governor's office this session to make sure that there is additional funding to meet those administrative costs to operating a program like SNAP. If we don't do that, then we will be facing a hunger crisis in this state that the likes of which we have never seen before. But also what that means is that it is possible to make sure that almost everybody does stay connected to these programs that they're eligible for food support and health insurance. And in order to do that, we need to be really, really smart and strategic. I think the way that Vermonters Feeding Vermonters is a smart and strategic program with a lot of economic multipliers. I think that we can be smart and strategic as a state in thinking about how we can deploy small amount of state funding to make sure that people can navigate these new requirements and meet the new requirements in order to be able to stay connected to these programs. And just to remind you all, Three Squares Vermont in Vermont, it brings over $150 million a year for people to buy food here in Vermont. For every one equivalent of a meal that Vermont Food Bank provides, Three Squares Vermont provides 9 in our state. So the scale that we're talking about is enormous, and it's important that we keep that in mind. We need both. We need the charitable food system, and we need Three Squares Vermont and the other federal nutrition programs that operate in our state. We need all of that together. We need even more than what we have, but we absolutely have to keep that whole ecosystem alive and well and operating strongly for people in our state. And Vermonters Feeding Vermonters is a critical component of that, and fully funding and our Three Squares Vermont program and making sure that people have the ability to navigate these new and very confusing requirements that are being imposed from the federal level. Both of those paths are critical. We have to walk them both. And Hunger Free Vermont would respectfully ask all of you to support us walking both of those paths in this legislative session.
The moment, though, we're only looking at the food bank.
Yes.
Proposal, but,
Yes.
As we get into.
Just trying to provide a little broader
Yeah,
context.
helpful. Yeah, actually, I think that was a very good use of 5 minutes, so thank you. Yeah. Representative Nelson, then Representative Burt.
I have 3 questions. I'll try to keep
Okay.
brief. So the required paperwork you've had to do for the feds, which we don't have any control over federal policy, we're a Vermont policy here. But you've always, last year you reported to us that you're really accurate and you have very few people slipping through the cracks. So when the feds called for that report, I wasn't concerned. Did they take 10% of your money away that was going toward doing the paperwork? I saw the shift in numbers, and I can't remember what it was.
Right. Well, Hunger Free Vermont, we don't administer the SNAP
Yeah.
program in Vermont. It's the state of Vermont, the Department for Children and Families that does. And state agencies that administer that program are being required to pay, rather than there being a 50% cost share to administer the SNAP program, which has all historically been what it's been. A state government puts up 50% of the money to operate the program according to the federal rules, and the feds put up the other half. Now it's shifting to a the feds are only going to provide 25% of the cost and the state has to cover 75%. So it's a pretty significant increase. And that also does apply to the funding to carry out outreach on the SNAP program, public education, so people know it exists and they know where to go to apply. And that's also part of the federal rules that states need to do that work. And that cost share is also changing from 50-50 to 25% federal, 75% non-federal dollars. So in Vermont, the state contracts with a range of nonprofits to carry out that outreach work, and including Hunger Free Vermont and Vermont Food Bank. So we raise private funds to do the match. And so yes, we will have to raise more private funds, but that's not what I'm talking about here today. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is how critical it is for the state to be able to administer the program really effectively and well, because if we don't do that, another piece of the federal law is that if states' error rates in how they calculate payments to people in SNAP go over 6%, then the state will have to, for the first time ever in the history of the program, pay a portion of the benefits that go to individual households, which has always been 100% federal funding. Right now, Vermont is one of only 5 states in the entire country whose payment error rate is below that cutoff. We've got to keep it that way. The reason why it is that way is because our state and the nonprofit partners that work on that outreach and application assistance work do a very, very careful job of making sure that people know what documentation do you need to submit, how do you do it, you're missing this piece, let's make sure you get that in. So that we have to keep that level of high customer service in Vermont going and even improve it if we're going to make sure that we can preserve this program and continue to
Continue to be one of the 5 states.
Yes.
Oh, wait, no, that's my other questions when she's in here, when Lenore's back to talk about SNAP.
Another time?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
I can hold off.
We do have time, so if anybody feels like you want to ask,
Can I just ask a follow-up to this?
sure, yeah.
I just wondered, has DCF calculated how much it costs to support SNAP?
So the gap, the extra 25% of funding is 6.9 million in this year, and because it's the federal year and the state fiscal year are off kilter from each other, I think it's 8.3 million a year going forward. And so that it's critical that we make sure that money is available to be used to administer the program effectively. Otherwise, our payment error rate will skyrocket. And then we're looking at 17 million, 22 million additional dollars a year.
Okay, good. I'm not sure that we had heard the numbers.
Those are all money. Those are all numbers that I'm just pulling directly from the Department for Children and Families report.
Go ahead, yeah. Okay.
Along the lines of, we mentioned soda before, did I hear that the federal government isn't allowing like things like sugar drinks to be purchased through SNAP now, or is that still?
The federal government is allowing states to apply for waivers, and there are some states that have implemented very recently bans on certain food items in SNAP. No.
It's very brief, but I have questions regarding news, blowback, truth when it comes to use of corruption, patients for voter. So everyone will be very threatened or suspicious, or so for another time. We need some truth to go into what's really happening in that regard, because it's impacting public attitudes.
Mhm.
And it's very confusing.
So,
Or
we can, that's a good idea, and we can,
it's Zivag or I don't know who it is, but
yeah, okay, we can, maybe after we're done here, we can have a.
thank you.
If I might just say one thing about that. So those programs that are in the news from Minnesota, those are totally different programs. I think it's just, I'll just say here that the SNAP program is the federal program, the federal benefit program with the absolute lowest amount of fraud of all the federal programs. The application, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at an application for Three Squares Vermont. It is daunting. It is extensive. It is many pages long. It requires a number of different items of documentation and verification. And it is not a program that is prone to fraud, either in Vermont or anywhere in the country. And I just want to make that point very clearly. That's not what we're talking about here when we talk about Three Squares Vermont.
To tie it back to your earlier remarks or the conversation we were having about error rates, those error rates, Vermont's, again, historically very low. We're one of just a handful of states that were below a certain level and therefore didn't have to pay any of the SNAP benefit at all from the federal government. Those rates are determined by some sort of audit, I imagine, and so it's not just self-reported there. That's somebody coming in and essentially
Yes.
verifying. Yeah.
Yep. And payment error rates refer to either an error made by the person applying for benefits. So perhaps they mean to check the box that says that their income is a certain amount every 2 weeks, but instead they check the box that says it's a month or something like that, right? So that could be an error, but also payment errors count against the state if it's the person applying or if it's somebody at the state agency who's trying to calculate the benefit and they make an error in their math. And it's a payment error if it's an underpayment or if it's an overpayment. And both occur. So when you hear the word payment error rate, I really urge you to not do what kind of the federal and national conversation is and think fraud, because that's not what a payment error rate is. It's an error, and their errors are made both in underpayments by the state agency to people who've applied and are eligible, and also overpayments. And they're made because of errors on a state agency side or on an applicant side. So I just please keep that in mind, that that's what we're actually talking about here.
Thank you very much. The excellent context, as always. Before we wrap up testimony on this topic, we heard that Mr. Chappelle was in the room, and I'm not sure whether that was to speak to us today. I know you're possibly on the agenda for later in the week too. Thursday, okay. So we will just note that.
If anybody has a question.
Yeah, but Carrie.
He's actually on the schedule on Thursday to talk to House of Commerce, not to speak with you.
Okay,
I have to give you that update. He's not
Okay.
gonna be able to stay in the afternoon, so if you want to just hop in the chair and introduce yourself right now, you're welcome to, if that's putting you on the spot. This is Ashley. Yes. You're right.
you can tell by how, well, no, I won't, won't finish that.
Hi, my name is Bob Chappelle. I'm a potato farmer in Williamstown, Vermont. And I am one of the beneficiaries of the Vermonters Feeds Vermonters on the food bank side. And this program, John and other people mentioned, it's a double win. The people getting food, good food, in the case of food bank, I can remember where I used to donate or sell number two produce, ones with defects, not first rate, but edible. And, you know, that's the way it was. And then when this Vermonters, Feeding Vermonters was started, and this is before I got into it, they were buying just number one quality produce, and they were paying fair prices. It wasn't. I can remember the days with number two stuff where, you know, if I couldn't get 10 cents a pound, well, I'd give it to them. You know, but that's not the way it is. And for our farm, it's very, you know, it's a very big important input. There's only one other organization that forward contracts that I know of. That would be tell me what that is. The one in Hardwick there. The Center for
Ag Economy.
Yeah, they have a program that affects me because they're looking for potatoes to produce potato wedges for universities and some schools throughout the state. That's good, and it's always nice to know ahead of time, you know, what you might be getting for a product. Dairy farmers they know what they're going to get, and it's generally not what they need. We literally put money and material into the ground with our fingers crossed. It's a roll of the dice every year. It's up and down. They've been literally boom and bust. And the fact that food bank with the Vermonters, Feeding Vermonters program, that's been good for us. Now, I'm getting up in years and our acreage is going down, but as a result, it's a bigger portion of our budgeting for the coming year. So and I'm not the only one. There's a lot. They would be able to tell you how many farmers are involved, but it's very important. And I take great pride in finally getting something other than number two produce with our name on the bag into you know, households throughout Vermont, ones that quite often can't afford to buy Vermont produce in the stores. And
Representative Nelson.
Where did you say your farm was again?
Williamstown.
Williamstown. And what are you doing to your number twos now?
Well, there's another nonprofit but private organization, which is called Tuberville, and it's basically run by one man, Ralph Perkins in Milton. And he's been doing this for years. He started out with his father growing a few acres of squash and potatoes. And he would donate those crops to the food shelves in the Burlington area. And he came to me like my time frames are not as accurate as they used to be, but it was at least 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Asked if I would advise him how to grow potatoes where he could get a little more production off his acres. And I said, yes, I would. And eventually, maybe less than 5 years later, he actually asked me to, if I had any number two produce that I would pack and sell to him, and then he distributed to the food shelves. And that's gotten bigger, but Ralph is also getting up there in years, and that is tailing off. But this is a man who, then the latest step maybe 5 years ago was he got nonprofit status and he has a network of friends, mainly in the Burlington area, that went around and would basically sell shares in Tuberville, which would be tax deductible. And all of a sudden he had a huge budget, more than what we could produce. And somehow, and he's very, very humble and private about the whole thing. He used to tell me when we first, just to give you an example, when he first started out, he said, I said once, what do you do for a living, Ralph? He says, well, I'm a kind of a forward guy. I set up venues for a musician. And I see that, you know, the tickets are distributed or whatever. And I heard that story for a year or so, and I said, who are you working for, Ralph? He said, oh, some old guy you've never heard of. I said, well, I like music. And he says, well, James Taylor. And this is the way he is. He just he's quiet and very private about everything. And he's very big-hearted person.
Taylor isn't that old, is he?
So you're able to move your number one.
Older than you.
And some, I'm sure you sell the local markets.
Yes,
And then you move a bunch through the food bank.
yeah.
And then you've got a market for your number twos at a lower price that are going to a good use and still feeding people.
Yes.
And I bought 50 pounds of potatoes from a very dear friend of mine in Maine, and I'll tell you what, most of them are number twos this year because he got slammed hard by the drought.
I'm in that boat myself. I've been,
I feel your pain. I'm a dairy farmer, so.
yeah. No, this is our 53rd crop we put in this year. It's the first time I've had a crop failure. And started off with some equipment breakdowns, but the drought. And then we had a freeze, not a frost. Frost doesn't bother potatoes. A freeze in October, right in the beginning of October, that cut one of those, almost half of our production was in a field. It was coming in good shape and got cut right down. So the potatoes weren't much bigger than the size of an egg. So luckily, I could say something. Let me get my 2 cents in here. It has nothing to do with the food bank. I am the only certified seed grower in the state of Vermont.
Okay.
And if you know somebody in Maine, you probably know there's at least 100 certified seed growers up there. And this is the case all across the country. I remember when I wanted to do this, I sort of not grown bored, but I wanted an extra challenge. And growing seed potatoes is tricky business. And you got to buy higher grade seed to start off with. And there's inspections involved. And I approached the Department of Agriculture. And a lot of people, you know, farmers included, say, you know, they complain about local government. What was his name? Phil Benedict. Does that mean anything?
Phil Benedict.
Okay, Phil Benedict was still in the department at that point. And he said, we still have a certified program on the books. And if Chappelle wants it, we're going to do it. And they actually took one of the newer employees, a pathologist, actually he was a forester, and they paid to have him educated how to spot virus in potatoes. I'm the only one, and I can tell you, I do my winter testing. The way it works is you grow your potatoes, but you got to send samples that get grown out, either in Hawaii or someplace, so that this time of the year they can go out and walk the fields, and they're visually looking at the foliage to see whether it has virus in it, which affects your future production. And I had to do all that through New York State because Vermont, you know, they knew where to level it off, but Vermont had an inspector, and yeah, the door was open, and it's hard to believe.
I could sit down and talk to you for hours about this, and
Oh.
I find this very interesting. Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
I'm glad that I'm glad we sorted that out, and you're welcome to come back again Thursday or anytime. Yeah.
I would like, maybe, I think you said there was, might be
There
an
might be
opening.
other,
late.
yeah, we'll talk about
Yeah.
other opportunities, Chair.
Yeah, I'm getting kind of slammed. I have I've overbooked, let's put it that way, for this time of the year. I'm meeting with my lenders as a result of this drought, beginning of next week, and there's a lot of prep going on.
So we grow corn on a lot of old potato land up in 14 and Craftsbury and.
Rose Farm in Albany?
Yeah. My dad grew up with them.
Yeah. What,
Nelson, Representative Nelson.
Yeah.
Down in Derby.
are you Doug Nelson or?
I'm his son.
Richard. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Meet you.
I think, Bob, your farm borders on Rodney Graham's, right?
That's right. Yes.
Used to sit in this seat. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we're neighbors and, yeah, same farm. Yeah, I was an engineer, then a math teacher for 14 years, and then a potato farmer. So, and I'm getting near the end of my productive years here, but I got to tell you that we didn't marry or inherit the farm. You understand that, and we started off with some really unsuitable equipment, and but we buy secondhand, fix it up, and we made do. But it's and somebody you also probably know, Bert Peasley, was just a tremendous help. I think a lot of people know that name, and there's a new man on his farm in Guildhall. Yeah, Matt Linear. But yeah, Bert was just wonderful man.
Yes, sir. And would teach.
Yes. That's what I do now. I tell you, there are I'm not going to mention any names, but a typical produce farmer, you go say, how are you getting that kind of production out of your blueberries or whatever? I said, I'm not telling you. And I find that I depended on Maine Extension and Bert Peasley, and there was an inspector, Dick Jensen, that used to inspect the Department of Agriculture. I asked questions and I learned from them. And as I said, I was a teacher. This idea of hoarding knowledge does not make sense to me. There are a lot of mistakes to be made. And not everybody has to make the same mistakes.
Well, I think that's a good note to maybe say thank you again, and we will welcome you back later in the session.
I wasn't expecting to.
I'm glad you came.
Yeah. Why don't we take a short break? We'll come back and pick up the discussion and then move into the last topic of the day after that too.
Down.